Okay, my name's Ann Dee Ellis, and I'm here with Dr. Crowe. And I'm excited to have a conversation about your career. You're getting the Lifetime Achievement Award, your life, everything we can learn from you, all the wisdom you have to impart.
I'll dump it all.
Okay, dump it all on us. Okay, well, I thought do you mind talking about your childhood a little bit and like your experience with reading and writing and well, maybe not, you're laughing, so I'm not sure. But
my childhood.
Just in terms of like, your literary exposure.
Yeah. My dad read a lot. He didn't read to us a lot, but he liked to read cheap detective stories, I think.
Oh.
Just paperbacks. He would just read them like TV for him. And my other brothers didn't. They were all really good students, but they weren't readers. I think somehow I got hooked on fiction. So we had all the Hardy Boys books.
Oh, okay.
I think my goal at some point was to read them all or have them all in the house.
Meaning you were buying them?
Yeah, I think my parents were buying some. We maybe ended up with 20, not all of them. But Tom Swift, the series around that, I was probably 4th or 5th grade reading those. And that led me to some of the old science fiction guys like H.G. Wells, and people whose names I don't remember, just reading for fun. So when I was in 6th and 7th grade, in the summer there was a great public library. We lived in Dublin, California, and so I'd just go and just get a bunch of books and kind of wander the shelves and take off stuff look interesting and
just on your own.
Yeah, just read yeah.
So no one's taking you to the library. It's just something you kind of.
I think when we were little, my mom would take us to the library, probably get us out of the house. But no, when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, it was just something to do in the summer. There's not much you can do when you're that age, so besides you get in trouble. So
well, that's true.
Yeah.
I'm finding that out. Was there a book or a moment like when growing up when you're like, oh yeah, I want to do this? Like.
So I think it was when I was reading War of the Worlds, or maybe some other science fiction novel called From the Earth, the Moon, and Back. I thought, I wonder if I could do this. I wonder if I could. So I think of like when you have a book. For me, I think the moment was I was reading a book and thinking, how do I get to be this side of it? Instead of this side of it, the receiving side. And I had no clue. I didn't know anybody who wrote. My dad never went to college. Nor did my mom, so it was just kind of I don't know. We had an old Underwood typewriter, just cast iron. It weighed a ton, and so I would hunt and peck. But I thought it was going to be a novel. It was a War of the Worlds, just just with my spelling, and I think that was the first time I thought about it, but I didn't really pursue it except to keep reading.
Okay. Was there a teacher or anyone who kind of influenced you in high school or as you're going along, like with your writing, or?
My high school teachers, I had great teachers, but nobody ever encouraged me to write that I can remember. Lots of reading. I was in high school when, for at least one of my sophomore year, when they still had a kind of an elective program where you could take all kinds of stuff by the semester. So I had a great class of Greek and Roman mythology that I think influenced me in ways I probably didn't know at the time, but just for me it was just reading great stories, but then seeing the connections between the myth stuff and other modern stories. I had some really crappy English teachers and some really good ones, but no one ever said, oh, you should write, that I can remember in high school. What I would do most often that was fun was my best friend, he and I were born on the same day even, in his high school senior year. His parents moved somewhere, and he was student body president, didn't want to go, so he moved in with us. And so we shared a bedroom.
Oh.
And we shared a locker in school. And so I could never find my American history book, and I would just take his. Mm-hmm. And so I would write in the margins of it, just things I thought were funny.
Of his book?
Yeah, of his book.
You mean you felt like you could because it wasn't your book?
Yeah.
Or? Yeah.
And I knew he wouldn't be able to sell it back. And we had to buy the books, because I was writing in it. So then he would start writing back. And so in the margin of this book, we had these conversations that we thought were really witty. And they may have been. I can't remember.
You don't have the book still?
Yeah. That's the whole argument. It still goes on. Like, he's got it. He says, I've got it. And
nice.
Yeah, but I think it was the first time I really had fun writing. So then when I came to BYU, I was a history major and took the history intro class, and it was horrible. I thought, who would ever want to do this? And I was taking a GE lit class, just survey of genre stuff, and I thought, man, I like this. I like this. So I took a creative writing class, just 218, and that was the first teacher I ever had who just said, you should keep doing this.
Okay.
So, that was enough for me to want to keep doing it.
So was your focus then, because you did English education, did that kind of come first, or was the creative writing, how did that
I think I was
evolve?
more interested in the writing, but I didn't take any more classes. I just I didn't know how people became writers. I mean, I never knew anybody who did. Where my wife's family, her great-great-grandmother was a poet laureate of Ohio in the 1920s, published like 10 books of poetry, and her grandmother's a really famous painter who studied with that family of painters from the East Coast. Anyway, so she grew up with like books from people in her family that had written in paintings and stuff, and her mother was a professional cellist, and we played football.
You're like, oh, this isn't our culture, really.
We didn't have that kind of exposure to people who did things using their creative abilities. And, you know, when I was here, I was on the football team, and so football players don't major in English. They don't write. You know, it was the dumb football player stereotype still back then in the 70s. So when I became a high school teacher, I learned that working and writing myself helped me relate to my students. And so I was trying to freelance a lot of for magazines a lot. And so sometimes you get a letter back from editor saying, here's some revisions. And so I just tell my students, here's something I'm working on. Let me read you this. Let me read you that. Let's talk about how I might revise this.
Okay.
And so I felt like I had more credibility with my students because I was trying to write. I was facing some of the same challenges they were, although I was volunteering for it. They had to do it because they were stuck in my class.
But you're getting feedback and going through that writing process.
And learning how to write. So it was, and I just devoured. It was kind of like an apprenticeship for me, an informal MFA, because I was reading every book I could find about the teaching of writing and about writing creatively. And the two big magazines at the time, The Writer and The Writer's Digest, were really, now they're kind of commercially, and I don't think they're very good, but back in the 70s and 80s, they were really thoughtful, and lots of articles by writers.
Right.
And not just nobodies, but important writers. And so I was reading that stuff all the time and just thinking, okay, I've got to figure out how this works. And kind of thinking I might write a book someday, but not knowing how, so I just continued to freelance. So
you really taught yourself.
Yeah.
So you did English education thinking I'll also write, but I'm going to, was it kind of a thought that this would be your career?
I was not strategic.
Oh, you weren't thinking that through?
No. So it was just, I wanted to be an English teacher because I admired some of the teachers I had, but I also wanted to coach because I'd had really great coaches all through high school, and I thought I want to be like these guys. That was my dream. And so I think the writing just came up because as a teacher you have time in the summers to do something like that, and I thought maybe I could write some newspaper articles or something. So one of the best things I did for 5 or 6 years was writing a regular column for a newspaper. It was a newspaper that was in Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, maybe. It came out twice a month. So I wrote a humor column for it. And it was nice just having that regular assignment. I always had to be thinking about the next thing and trying to get ahead. And so that I think that practice of writing for deadlines, revising, rethinking, looking for ideas, because I could do whatever I wanted. You know, it was a nice thing of me having a column.
That's cool.
Just
So it wasn't
I wanted
sports
to write.
centered or anything like that?
No, whatever I wanted to write about. So that was for a writer, that was a big deal for me to kind of have a gig in writing as opposed to just freelancing stuff and getting rejected all the time.
So I have a question about, your culture at home was football and
other sports. I had 3 brothers, and all of us we got to college because we had scholarships. We couldn't have gone.
Oh.
We wouldn't have had the money to go.
And neither of your parents went to college.
Mm-hmm.
So you were offered a scholarship, so you went, or were you always thinking I'd go to college?
I think it was, but it was about playing football. It wasn't to think get an education.
Right.
That's just what you do. That's the next thing. Once you finish high school, then when you go to college, then you go to the pros, which that doesn't.
That didn't work out.
No.
Well, but how much did Liz influence you? Because you guys met in high school, right?
Yeah. So she was a real Molly Mormon.
Interesting.
And I was Catholic, and when she moved into our high school, so she came from Scottsdale into Tempe, where I lived in Arizona, and she'd lived in Arcadia. Went to Arcadia High School, which is kind of a rich part of town, and a little bit snobby probably too. Steven Spielberg went there.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, there you go.
But when she came into my English class my sophomore year, and she sat right in the middle of me and 3 of my buddies, and we just teased her. My goal was to make her cry every day if I could.
Every day? So that means you achieved it some days. Okay.
She hit it in my guts. It was so sophomoric, I thought, okay, now she's noticing me.
So you liked her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was too stupid to know how to let a girl know that I liked her, and so I thought, well, I'll tease her. And she really despised me. And then our junior year, we ran each other in the library of all places. I'm not sure why I was there. It was after school, so it must not have been. I was playing all 3 sports. So I don't know what I don't know why I was there. I must have been, maybe we didn't have practice or something. But she just happened to be there, and we just started chatting. And she tells me now. She said, "Well, you were different. You were different than you were." So stupid.
By yourself.
Sophomore.
So you were like,
yeah. So it was kind of the life of the mind in her family. I remember the first time I went to her house, I heard this music. Knocked on the door, and there's somebody playing music, and I just thought, well, and knock a little louder. Finally, her mom swings at her. What are you doing? I'm giving a lesson in here.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, I don't know. I don't know. What's a lesson, So I had to go around the back, and her mom was, anyway, I was scared to death of her mother. But I just didn't know how people, I just didn't know that if somebody's playing the cello in the living room that you don't.
Right. So there's certain rules and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she took school much more seriously than I did, and for me, I never studied. It was just easy, and so she was more methodical. She was planning ahead, thinking about stuff, and I was just like, yeah, next semester. Well, I guess I'll take what my brother took. It's easy.
Yeah.
So in college, we got married after my freshman year.
So you got baptized?
Yeah, so I joined a church right after,
what point?
In July after I finished high school. So a couple months after we graduated. And then I'd already agreed to come to BYU just because they were so crappy. I thought I'd play a lot if I came here.
Okay, that's a good reason.
They were bad. And I had an offer from the University of Arizona, but it was too, I didn't like it. I didn't like that atmosphere there. So, and I kind of wanted to get out of Arizona. So in our, we lived in Wymont Terrace, and the scholarship covered housing and stuff, but still we were starving. She worked in the temple in the laundry. That's kind of a paying job, part-time job.
Wow.
That's how we got by. And I just took classes that looked interesting. I just thought, I'll take that. I'll do that. And there was no academic advisement for football players in those days that I know of. Anyway, we had some things maybe, but anyway. And at one point, I think in my junior year, she said, "When are we going to graduate?" And I thought, well, sometime.
Yeah. She's like, what are you doing? Yeah.
So she's like, "But when?" I want to know when. And I thought, I guess I should probably plan. I probably should think about which classes I have to take.
That's funny.
So then I met with an advisor, and he helped me map stuff out, and graduated. And my goal was to be a teacher and a coach. We graduated in December, which was a bad time if you want to find a job. But I had 2 offers. One at a Salt Lake City junior high school, Churchill, I think. And then
That's where my husband went.
You went there?
Yeah, he went to Churchill. Yep.
9th grade.
Yeah, that's what John Austin used to teach too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He got bussed over there. Gifted.
Anyway, I wanted to coach, and junior highs didn't have sports programs really. So
right.
Weaver offered me a job, and they needed a football coach and a track coach. And I thought, that's what I want to do. So we moved up there and bought a house, and thought, this is it.
Where we'll be.
Yeah. And I think in March, so we moved there in January. In March, maybe my oldest brother, who's a high school football coach, it's in a district where we both had gone to school, but it's not at my old school.
You mean at that time?
Yeah, at the time.
Okay.
He said, "Hey, our old school, McClintock, has an opening for for a coach, not an English teacher, for a coach." He said, "You should apply." I was like, So I called the principal, and he knew me, and And you can't say, yeah, we got a job, but he just said, well, why don't you come down, we'll interview you.
Right.
So I went down there and talked to him, and he said, okay, I'd really like to offer you a job, but you've got to convince the English department chair that you're going to be an English teacher, because coaches have horrible reputations for not caring about the teaching part of school.
Yeah.
So I met with her, and it was school I had attended, and so I knew of her, but I never had a class from her, which is probably a good thing. And so we talked, and I think one of her concerns was, will you come to faculty meetings, or are you going to go to practice? Are you going to skip out for things? And I said, no, I want to be an English teacher. And so she gave me the green light, and so they offered me a job, and we sold this house we'd bought like
in
4 months ago.
Yeah.
And moved down to Arizona and thought, okay, no, this is this is where we'll be. This is the end now. We bought a house, good job at a great school, doing what I've always wanted to do. Started going to graduate school after my first year, taking classes at night, just to advance on the salary schedule. And somewhere, either my master's or doctoral program, I took a graduate creative writing class. It was more like a freelance. It was like writing nonfiction.
Because you've been doing that? Is that kind of,
I've been trying. Like, I used to freelance stuff for the New Era. Back then they paid pretty well. And just all kinds of magazines, really, out of anything I could find that I could write for. And so that class was sort of focusing on that. I remember one night they had a guy who just got out of the prison to come and speak, and he'd apparently written a bunch of magazine articles. And what I remember him saying, which I thought, I hope this isn't true, is he said, if you haven't really suffered, you've got nothing to write about.
Wow. Yeah,
and I thought, okay, well, I haven't been to prison. What am I going to... That's kind of what he was saying.
There's lots of ways to suffer, but yeah, I can
he was
see
kind of
that.
saying, if you haven't been to prison, you can't be a writer. And I thought, well, I hope that's not true. And then I took another. Rita Dove was on the faculty then at Arizona State, and I didn't even know who she was. I think she's a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, eventually. And but there was a guy there named Norman Doobie who taught poetry, and I thought, I'll take a poetry workshop just because it'd be good for me,
Yeah.
And it was over the summer term, and so first day of class, I'm finding a classroom and sitting there, and everybody in the classroom knew each other except for me.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking, well, this is kind of weird.
Because they're in a cohort or something, or
they're groupies, I guess. I don't know what they were exactly,
okay.
But clearly I was the outsider.
Right.
And Doobie walks in 15 minutes late, probably the first day of class, and he's swearing about the damn pharaohs who run the school and and stuff. They just kind of look around the class, and he stops and he zeroes in on me and says, "Who are you?"
Wow.
And Chris Crowe goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I want to take your class." He goes, "No, you're not going to take my class." And I was dismissed.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I wasn't a groupie. I don't know why. I assumed it because I wasn't a groupie.
Wow.
So.
Did that affect you? Like, was that a moment?
It made me think he was a jerk, but and he might still be teaching at ASU. But I just thought, oh, well, I guess I don't know how graduate school works, or
sure,
maybe I should have. I don't know. So I don't know if I probably took something else. I don't remember now what. But that was a little bit of a bummer. But I think that once I finished grad school, so I was writing academic articles too, trying to get those published, like in English Journal and stuff, which was a good thing. It turned out in the long run, but I was still freelancing as much as I could. So one summer I thought, I'm going to really see if I could earn enough money freelancing to pay a month's rent or to pay a month's expenses, mortgage and whatever stuff.
Because you're thinking, I want to do this more than teaching. Or
just doing a summer full time instead of have a summer job. So one summer I had a great job writing for the Arizona Golf, for this golf magazine, and I didn't know anything about golf, but I learned.
But clearly you had a passion for writing. Yeah. Like, you knew you wanted to
whatever
write.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
I liked to write.
Yeah.
And so I had 100 rejections that summer, just because I was stupid. I wasn't really thinking about audience. I was thinking, okay, here's a magazine and they do stuff like this. I'll write something I think like that, instead of thinking, no, wait, I should think more careful. So for me, that was a good lesson to learn, that every publication has a sense of audience and mission. And so if you're writing something that doesn't go in that direction, you're wasting your time. Even if they like what you've written, if that's not what they do, then they're not going to. It doesn't matter. So so then that's my, I don't know where else to go from there.
So, well, this is great. I think it's really interesting because it's clearly like writing was a passion even when you didn't realize it was, So that experience, I don't think there's a lot of things to think about with like writing freelance and getting deadlines and things like that. But also a negative experience in graduate school could really set people. Like I remember Virginia Wolf talking about a bad experience in an MFA program that set her back years. So, I mean, it didn't affect you in that way.
He hadn't seen my writing. If he had savaged some piece of writing, I might have.
Sure.
I just felt like, okay, I'm not a part of his group.
Totally.
So.
But I think it's interesting to think about how there's systems in place, and if you don't understand the system.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So then you ended up going to get your PhD.
Right, in Tempe. So it's like the university was 2 miles from the high school where I was working, and they offered a lot of classes at night and in the summer. So it was easy to meet. Well, not easy, but it was possible for me to take night classes and summer classes to work towards a master's. And then when I got the master's, I thought, well, I might as well keep going. The salary schedule, has more options.
So it was more for the salary schedule than, I want to be a professor.
Oh, yeah, totally. It was totally salary schedule. And I graduated in May with my master's, and I must have applied at some of the community colleges, but the Mesa Community College, which is a big school down in Arizona, in the valley there, I never heard from them, and then the day before the semester began, so the Friday before the start of their semester, their department chairman called me and said, "Hey, can you teach two classes?"
Wow.
At night.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, because we needed the money for one thing. And so that was kind of my first experience with kids. And they were, at that community college, the average age was 30. So almost all the students not almost all, but a lot of the students had been working for a few years and realized, I got to do something different. And so they came back to school really as willing learners, as opposed to freshmen who just finished high school and they're still resistant to doing stuff. And so
in comp classes,
comp, and there was even a pre-comp class that they had to take a writing test to get into the freshman comp. And if they didn't have the skills, they got bumped into a remedial class, which I also taught. Wow. And that was really fun because I felt like I can help. I get where their phobias, and so I knew how to get around that. Yeah. And they're so grateful to finally understand how to use an apostrophe, or how to have a positive in a sentence, or whatever it was. It was really fun. And then I had some really talented writers. One woman who was a mom, married. She was probably maybe in mid-40s at the time. She was really a good writer, and so I said, "Hey, you need to write for publication." And she's like, "I don't think I can do that." I said, "No, you can." So there was a composition textbook, I think the Bedford Reader or something. It had essays for students to read, and they had a contest for college freshman students could send in an essay. Well, she won.
Oh, that's
published
amazing.
in their book, I just thought, wow, that's kind of fun, and it was also kind of a no-brainer. I mean, when somebody writes really well, it's like
you take credit for it.
Yeah, you can't. It's like say, I wish I could, but you just kind of encourage him. Right?
Give him the nudge, right? And that's a big deal because sometimes you can't see your own potential. So that's cool.
Yeah. So that was the first time I think I thought, I think I could do. Like, I really loved the school where I was working, and I loved my students, but I thought, this is something else I hadn't thought about. I could do this. And kind of the nice thing would be, although now I wouldn't think it was so nice, but when I taught class 50 minutes. We taught 5 classes a day at the high school. And at the community college, it was classes met Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so you'd have 2 days you didn't have any classes. But so you'd have 5.
Right.
Their load was 5, which to me it looked better than what I was doing, just in terms of time to write. That's what I was thinking by then. And like halfway through graduate school, I quit coaching because I just didn't have time. I mean, I was getting to school at about 5 because I'd work 3 days a week because I'd worked out with some other coaches in the morning, then teach, then coach, then go. ASU's classes started at 7, from 7 to 10 I'd be in class, and come back home about 10:30 or 11. And I used to just walk in the door and
hi, goodbye, kind of just go to sleep. Yeah.
And I'd get up at 5 the next morning. And there was church. I was Elders Quorum president in a ward that had 1,000 members, and we had people moving in. They was building houses like crazy, and so every weekend there's somebody moving, and it was a busy time. So coaching, I thought I really liked doing it, but I thought I can't do everything, and so I gave up football first, and then I really liked track, but I just couldn't do that too, so I gave that up too.
And that was your initial motivation, like I just want to coach.
Yeah, which was odd, I guess, but then I thought that. So anyway, the seed kind of was planted. Oh, maybe a college job would be. You still would love the teaching, but you'd have time to write.
Right.
So then I started applying because the Mason community was so big, and they had campuses in other places too in the valley. And I thought, okay, I've got a doctorate.
Right.
You just need a master's. I can get a job. And the president was on the high council with me, and he sat next to me on the high council. Okay. But I think after a couple years of applying, I asked him one time after a meeting, I just said, so what's the deal, President? And he said, well, here's the deal. MCC, Mason Community College, was on probation for some kind of hiring, discrimination or something. And so he said, the hiring committee has to recommend to me 5 people for each position. 3 have to be women and 2 have to be minorities. And he said,
this is what year, do you think?
This was 1980.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So he said, even if I wanted to hire you.
See, this isn't working, can I? Oh, no. Oh, it's still going?
Yeah, it's still going.
Okay. It wasn't. Okay.
Anyway, he said, even if I wanted to, I can't. I mean, it's not going to be possible. And I thought, well, it's okay. I mean, I was disappointed in that, but I thought, because it seemed to be such a great job staying, because we liked where, at least I liked where we lived. Liz didn't like it so much, but I liked the school. I thought, okay, we've got friends here, families all around, so it's good to stay here. So then, I hope you can edit this stuff out if it's too long. But after when I was still in graduate school, my 7th year, so at ASU so I had my master's and then graduate courses for the PhD. We had to take 60 credits after our master's. And then they had a comprehensive exam. It was 2 days of just writing essay questions for 8 hours.
Wow.
And once you pass your comps, then you could go ahead and work on your project. So I'd finished. It'd been really a grind. All the classes and all the papers and staying up late and stuff, getting up early. So in the 7th year, my 7th year teaching at McClintock, I just passed my comps that August, and I think I was just ready to, 7-year itch, something new. And so school had started, and it was like the first week of school, and I was like, I didn't want to go home because I knew I'd have yard work to do. So I thought, I was just waiting, just killing time in the department office. Nobody was around, and the department newsletter, the district newsletter had come out back in those days in paper. And I was reading it, and they had this little note. The city of Himeji, Japan is looking for an English teacher for the school year. Call this number if you're interested. And I thought, So I called Liz. We had 2 kids at the time. I said, hey, how would you feel about going to Japan this year? And she's like, maybe.
Yeah.
So I called the number, and the guy was the president of Phoenix College, and it was a sister city deal. And he said, they're desperate. They need somebody immediately. How fast can you get here? And I said, well, or get there. And I said, well, I don't even have a passport, but
right.
I can get that.
And you'd never been out of the country?
No, never. Huh? Maybe been to Mexico. I think I've been to Mexico once across the border. So anyway, he was real encouraging, and he said, finally, after we talked and my experience and stuff, he said, so just one question, are you married? I said, oh yeah, I am. He goes, oh, they don't have housing for married. I was like, oh, well, okay, thanks. I go home, and then Saturday I get a call from this guy, and he says, I've been talking to the Board of Education in Himeji. They found a place for a married couple. They want you as soon as you can get here. Just one question, do you have any kids? I said, yeah, we got 2 kids. And he said, they don't have housing for a family, And I was like, okay. So then he calls me on Sunday. He says, I just talked to him again. They found a place for your family. How soon can you get here? And so I don't know how long. It took us 3-4 weeks to get back. In those days, there was nothing digital, so everything had to be paper copies that you had to FedEx back and forth and get pictures of the kids with the child passports and all that stuff. And so probably October 1st we went, just the 4 of us with 2 suitcases each, and they had an apartment set up for us and all that stuff. And it was an interesting experience. It was, we knew nothing about Japanese culture or Japanese language. We really were
just walked in
totally ignorant.
Yeah.
Just in a shock. And the first day, I think we got there late on a Saturday night, and so Monday morning they came to pick me up to work, and Liz was like, "What am I going to do? I got 3 kids.
How old are
How do you even get
kids?
groceries?
Little,
you know?
right? Yeah.
They were 2 and 4.
Wow.
And but they had lots of nice people who helped us out, and we figured things out, and it was under the mayor's direction, so we were technically guests of the mayor of the city, and so we had lots of social things we were invited to, and people wanted to be helpful, and with money and stuff, they would help us learn how to use a cash machine and where to shop. And the missionaries were there were 6 missionaries in Himeji, 2 sisters and 4 elders, and the ward just happened to be in the city where we lived, because in Japan in those days there weren't many wards.
Yeah, I bet.
And I mean, there were like 60 people who attended, and 6 of them were missionaries, and 4 of them were my family. But the bishop spoke English, and so the sisters taught us where to shop and what to shop, how to cook the stuff, and they were really good for us. So at the end of that year, the mayor had my boss. The mayor didn't speak English, but he had my boss ask me if I'd stay for another year because it was cheaper for them to have some continuity instead of flying a new family out just to stay. And I said, no, I got to go back and write my dissertation because I'm just on a leave from the school for a year. So thanks, but I need to go back. And so about a month before we went back, my boss came back to me again and said, the mayor has another question for you. That we're negotiating with the city, with the university in Tokyo to open a new campus here in Himeji in a few years. Are you interested in being on the faculty? I was like, I don't know, keep me in mind.
Wow.
I got to go back and
finish up
yeah. And anyway, so we go home, and I finished my dissertation.
Was it on young adult literature?
No, it wasn't. It was on on writing, teaching writing. So it was, as a teacher of writing, what I knew was so true then, because I'd been trying to write myself, and I've been reading tons of stuff by writers. I just felt like textbooks were lying. That what they were telling is how you write. It's not how real writers wrote.
Interesting.
And so my dissertation was interviewing 10 writers from a variety of, like one was a newspaper writer, one of them kind of wrote for women's magazines, kind of slick magazines in the 80s, and I can't even remember now all of them, but just 10 different kinds of writers, long interviews, and then would try to match up what they said about writing with what textbooks said about writing, to see, if there's any kind of correlation.
Yeah.
And some writers I learned don't know. They don't know why they write the way they do, but they think they know. So one guy was like, "Oh, diagramming, definitely. I learned how to diagram sentences. That's why I'm a writer today."
Wow,
thought, okay.
I would never imagine that answer.
I wasn't expecting it.
That might fit with the
And he was totally
textbook.
convinced, and I just thought, well, then I realized, okay, it's such an idiosyncratic thing. We don't really know what it is that made us writers.
Right.
We just assume we know. So, but for me, that was, thinking about writing, talking to writers, trying to figure out writing myself. That's why I chose that topic. And Donaldson's class, of course, was a big deal in young adult lit, but I wasn't even thinking about writing novels back then. I just thought, I'm trying to write anything that can get published. So, 2 or 3 years must have been, probably 3 years pass, and I get a call from my former boss, kind of a panicky call. He goes, "Man, we've been trying to find you. Where have you been?" Because in those days, before cell phones,
right.
When
No
you moved
internet.
your number changed, and so we canceled our phone. We went to Japan, and so we got a new number when we came back.
Yeah.
And so he didn't know how to get a hold of me. Somehow he found out where I was and called, and he's like, "The Ministry of Education is approving the faculty for this new university, lifetime appointments. They need to know in a week if you're coming or not." And I'm like, what?
They kind of always in a panic
I know.
to make an international move.
And so we were like, and we'd been there, so we kind of knew what we were getting into.
Right.
And winters were brutal because, I don't know if you remember in Taiwan, but nothing's heated. There's no central heating, and so you're on these bikes all the time, and you're just always cold. And the schools didn't have heat in the classrooms. And
That's
stuff.
hard. Yeah.
So and the language barrier and all that stuff. I mean, even though it was fun adventure, it was hard to live there.
Yeah.
And in church, you can't talk to anybody.
Right.
So,
yeah. Isolating. Yeah.
So we didn't want to go, and I was in a bishopric at the time, so I went to the bishop. Hey, bishop, you tell me to go, I'll go. You tell me to stay, I'll stay. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And he goes, I can't tell you what you need to do. I can't tell you what to do. And we talked to my wife's parents, and they were like, well, you need to decide. We made the pro con lists and all that stuff, and finally we just felt like we have to go. We don't want to go, we have to go. So we found a renters for our house, sold most of our stuff, and we went to the airport, and we had, with 4 kids then, so we had, we had 6 times 2, 6, we had 12 suitcases and gosh. 6 carries everything. Wow. And, you know, made it through the airport, and we weren't guests of the city anymore, and so we had to, somebody helped us find an apartment building near the neighborhood we'd lived in before, so that was convenient for us, and it wasn't too far from the university, and so we had to pay 8 months, we had to pay 10 months rent deposit up front, plus a month for the realtor, plus a month the first month's rent. Wow. So in cash. Wow. So it was like a drug deal. We had all these 10,000 yen notes we shoved across the table and had to sign there. Anyway, that was an adventure too, spending money like that. And we thought, okay, the Lord wants us here. We'll, you know, and it wasn't satisfying teaching for me. I liked having the time because I had a lot more time to write. And so I was working on stuff all the time, but the students' language skills were pretty low, and even in American literature class, they weren't good readers. They're kind of late. It wasn't a great university. It was more a lower level university in Japan, and so I thought, okay, man, teaching is not satisfying, but at least I have time to write. Yeah. And so I freelanced for some magazines, and there's lots of magazines in Japan for foreigners, you know. So I freelanced some magazines, articles there, and started working on a novel, but we realized after a couple of years we can't. Our kids went to public schools and learned Japanese. So our daughter negotiated a car deal. We bought a car. Oh, so she was the intermediary when she was 8 years old.
It's good to have your 8-year-old negotiate your car deal. I love that.
So and I started looking for jobs, and before the internet, you know, nobody would interview a guy in Japan. I mean, phone calls were like $3 a minute when I'd call home. Yeah. So and we just thought, you know, we don't have the cultural push to make our kids go to cram schools after school and on weekends so they can get into a decent high school, so they can get into a decent university. We can't do that. Even if we wanted to, we wouldn't know how to do it. So I was applying all over the place in the United States. We had a color-coded map of, you know, where we kind of went near a temple, college town. A lot of times I didn't get responses. They're just like a bad. I mean, they're not going to talk about that. And so there was somehow, I think Jess Christer was department chair at BYU Hawaii, and he knew I was in Japan. I don't remember how. Maybe something I'd published, I think it was. And so he mentioned that they were having this International Humor Society conference. They were hosting it at BYU Hawaii, and I should propose a paper. And he said, and we might have an opening. We can talk about that when you get here. And so
that's great.
Sent in a proposal, got accepted. The university gave me time to go, professional work, and I thought, so Liz came with me because I thought, well, you know, if we're going to move, you should know what we're going to do. Check it out. Yeah. And the whole time we were there, he wouldn't talk to me. He just was dodging me. I mean, like, obviously seeing me and turning the other direction. Because
he was worried that he made promises he can't keep or something?
So the night before we had to leave, I called him and said, hey, man, we got to talk. I came all this way.
Did you know him before?
No. Well, I'd met him at the conference
briefly,
when I was in graduate school. And so he goes, okay, maybe in my office, you know, at 8 o'clock or something. So I go down there, and he's like, I feel awful about this, but the opening we had, the vice president's wife took it. And so we don't have any spot, you know? And so it was just crushing. And so I went and told Liz, and the next day we're going in the Honolulu airport, and we're in the international boarding with all these Japanese people. It's just like being back in Japan. We're like, I guess we're gonna be here forever, you know. Yeah. And so we were there. It was probably a month or so, and we started making changes the way we were living, just digging and like buying a car and doing things more permanent. And we used to go in the morning. I would go run a little bit, and then I'd meet Liz, and we would go run for a couple miles, and before the kids got up, and then come back and read our scriptures, write our journals, whatever, and stuff in the morning. And so usually we'd be back by 6:30, and we were doing she was in a different room, I was in my room doing our stuff, and the phone rings, and we thought, when the phone rang at weird times, you always know it's somebody from America, because nobody knows what time it is in Japan. And it was the vice president of BYU Hawaii, and he's like, we just have somebody break their contract and leave for fall. And we've got your materials on file. We want to know if you're interested in coming here.
Yeah.
and so I'm on the phone listening to him.
Was his wife that...
It was his wife.
It was his wife? Did she break her contract?
No.
Oh, okay.
Some guy had taken a job there for a year, and he couldn't stand living in Hawaii. He felt it because it wasn't Utah, and left. And so I was trying to get Liz's attention, like, you won't believe what we're talking about. And so I had to do some double teaching for the university in Japan. They didn't have to let me out of my contract, but they did. I think they knew with foreigners.
Yeah, they need to, yeah.
And so I taught a few extra classes to make up for the term I'd miss. And we moved in August to Hawaii. And it was a great place for me to be, because it was like, kind of like how it is here with you, where if you suggest something is a good idea, Jess will say, yeah, you can go do that.
That's awesome.
And so we started a literary magazine, and I was teaching creative writing and teaching fiction. Not writing, but reading a lot of fiction. And the classes were small, the students were really talented in English. And in the morning on the beach, and every day we'd run in the sand. And I'd get up and ride from 4 to 5 in the morning, and at 5 I'd go running with this guy, my neighbor, who was a marathon nut. And we'd run through the beach in the jungle, and it was even if it was raining, it didn't matter, because it was every day was warm,
temperate, yeah.
And so we bought graves there because we thought, why would we ever leave?
You bought
graves
there.
We thought we're never going to leave. Why would we leave?
That's funny.
And then BYU, I think after my third year, they had an opening here, and I thought, I don't want this job. I like where I'm living. I like what I'm doing. I like my colleagues and students. But as we prayed about it, it was clear that the Lord wanted us to come, even if we didn't want to come. So we came, after lots of agonizing prayer. And then, it was a real culture shock, because we've been at sea level for 4 years in Japan and 4 years in Hawaii. And so coming here with the winter, and we didn't need a snow shovel. We had a square nose shovel. Oh. The first winter, that's what I had to shovel a walk with.
It's ineffective, yeah.
And our kids, our kids been going to school barefooted in elementary school, and had to have shoes here and clothes, and it was so dry. Again, the sea level that's on islands, so the humidity was always high, and so Liz was getting nosebleeds every day.
Oh, wow.
Her nose would be so dry, and put lotion on her hands. And we thought, oh man, what are we doing here? And anyway, it worked out. But yeah.
So I hear you talk about, like, one of the things I wanted to ask is how you think, like, spiritually, like how that affected your career, like how the church and your relationship with the Spirit, and how that kind of guided you. We haven't talked a lot about your writing. I wonder if maybe it's clear that it's been important in your career, making choices like going places, but what about with your writing? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your novels or your, some of your nonfiction.
So, I think with, as a teacher, I was always writing about teaching and stuff, and reading about it too. I mean, part of that was because of grad school was simultaneous, so I was living it. I was reading about it and living it during the day. And so I liked being a part of the professional conversation that way, which turned out made it really easy. Well, I don't know how easy it was, but it made me a better candidate for the job here in Provo, because I was already doing what was expected.
Doing academic, yeah.
Not because I had to, but because I liked doing it.
Right.
And in Hawaii is when I first started working on a novel, and I had a cluster of really great students in my creative writing classes, and they all wanted to write novels too. So we created a class, a senior capstone, like it was 418, which they have now, but we made it up then. We had a creative writing mind that we made up then too. And so 5 of us just workshopped a novel. That was a class, and it was really great. They were all brilliant readers and writers. So that helped me get my first manuscript done. And I thought, I really like the longer form. The problem with writing novels is the time from seeing your work done is so long. Like when you're writing for magazines or like newspapers, it's the next day.
Right.
You get some feedback.
Right, totally. Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I did something.
Yeah, and you get kind of
when you write a book, it's like, okay, it's
5
all
years
this
later,
work, and then, oh yeah.
And will it even work out?
Yeah. So, so that was, but I think one of my favorite, and one of the best writing gigs I had was writing for the New Era, and I think I published a few things for the Ensign, back when they were taking freelance stuff. And so I felt like it was professionalizing, but also like an article back, because in print they had to be really strict about how long stuff could be because they only had so many pages.
Yeah.
And so they'd have like a new era article. They might say, we really like this draft you've got, but you need to cut 300 words out of the 2,000 or something. And they never said this
Which
chunk.
words,
It was just like, you've got to figure it out.
Right.
So I was like, at first ticked, like, why don't you just tell me what parts to take out? But then I had to learn how to revise and compress stuff and think, okay, with this phrase, with this sentence, with this, maybe this whole paragraph, what really is relevant,
Right.
what's not. So that really helped me as a writer learn how to revise, because I thought I can see fat in sentences where words just aren't doing any good, and they're just there because that's just how they came out. So that really helped me. So that's my favorite part of writing. I want to have a manuscript, a novel. I love going through and just seeing what I can squeeze out of a chapter. But with the spiritual stuff, I feel like in the Book of Mormon, is section 32. Anyway, there's a scripture about praying before consecrating your work and praying for inspiration. And so I've always tried to, before I do, especially work on a novel, every time I sit down to write, I kneel down and pray just from the creator of the universe can help me be creative. Yeah. I'm hoping. Yeah. And so that's a pattern I've tried to follow. And sometimes it depends on the day. Sometimes I'm not as good at it as others. But I feel like the lucky turns in my life as a writer were, I don't know, blessing. I don't think they were blessings like just out of heaven, but I feel like they came from my effort as a writer to move forward, and then looking for inspiration for opportunities to be inspired. So so my first academic book was this biography of Mildred Taylor, and I loved her novel Roll and Hear My Cry, and then I didn't even really I learned a lot about her whole career. But she's the one who mentioned just offhand that there's this, when she was a kid in '55, there was a kid her age who was murdered in Mississippi, and I'm like, oh,
you'd never heard of him.
Never heard of him, and she didn't say it. And I was embarrassed to ask her, and I just thought, oh. So I thought I need to know that, and so that led me to the Emmett Till story, and I thought, man, this is a big story that's nobody. This was like 1999 or '98 when I finished the book on Taylor. Nobody's ever talking about it. It wasn't in history books. He was nowhere. There was no story out there that had survived. And so I thought, okay, this is a chance to write a young adult novel where I can historically dig up the history of this case and plant a white kid there and have him. So that came first, the novel. Yeah. The novel came first. Okay. And tons of research, and I went down to Mississippi and spent a few days in Greenwood, that's the nearest town to where Emmett had been murdered, and just was trying to, how did people sound? How did things look like? I was there. I got there the day Emmett Till had gotten there decades before me, and taking the same notes. Season, like the same. Yeah, everything as much as possible. So I knew how it felt to be in Mississippi in August. It feels awful. And I can imagine. A couple people I met, and they're in the novel, especially one guy, this one character, and then all the nonfiction part, the historical stuff. I didn't change anything, so there's a lot of history in there. And so then, I was happy with that when it was done, and it's one of those things where you have an agent who just gets it's just the right match. So a lot of people turn the book down, but the editor who picked it up actually was Mildred Taylor's editor. Oh. And she is a young woman in the 60s, had marched, a white woman, but had marched in these civil rights protests, and so she was all over it. And I think she probably knew, I don't think she knew much about Emmett Till, but I knew she knew of him. Right. I remembered that was a big deal. And so when I was done, I had a couple of boxes of research notes and photographs and articles and stuff I'd found about the case and about Mississippi history and Black history and stuff. And I thought, I think I could do a nonfiction book. It'd be really easy just to flip this into a different, the same paper for 2 classes. And so I talked to my agent about it. So she talked to my editor, and she's like, no, she'd never done nonfiction. It's too expensive. Right. Photographs, all that stuff. Yeah, copyright and things, yeah. And my agent kept pushing her, and she said, okay, I'll consider it. So I wrote that. I signed so I got a contract for it. And did you write a proposal? Or was it? Yeah. Okay, you did. Yeah. And so I did, I had to figure out how to write a proposal first. Well, I guess I'd written a proposal for the Taylor book too, so I kind of knew how to do that. And so that's actually sold more copies, I think, than the novel.
Because you've traveled all over the country.
Yeah.
And is it with both books?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's usually one or the other, but
Cool.
yeah, those for most kids in schools, they learn about Emmett Till from one of those two books. And
which is, it's so widespread now.
oh yeah.
Before no one had heard, and now
it's out in the open. So one of the cool things when I was the year that nonfiction book came out was the year there's a guy who made a film called The Murder of Emmett Till for PBS. His documentary is a black filmmaker, and it premiered at Sundance Film Festival and then aired on Martin Luther King Day nationwide. And so when I was getting photographs from an archive in D.C., I think I was talking to somebody on the phone, and she said, some filmmakers using these photos. I go, really? Somebody's making a film? She goes, yeah, I don't know, some guy, I was like, oh. And so that nonfiction book came out almost simultaneously with the film. And then there was an English professor in Alabama who was doing a book called the Murder of Emmett Till Documentary Narrative, where he collected anything written about the case around the time of the case. Like Eleanor Roosevelt wrote an editorial condemning the crime, and Dylan had a ballad, and all this stuff, poems and whatever.
Okay.
And he was doing it. The three of us were working exactly at the same time.
That's so interesting.
And our two books and that movie all came out at the same time. And so it was like, oh. And since then, that was like something. The Spirit Zeitgeist, something is like, it's time for the Emmett Till story.
This needs to come out.
And his mom died a few days before the film premiered. And so that was kind of her, and her whole life had been spent making sure her son wouldn't be forgotten, which he had been, And so she was really supportive for people writing books or movies.
And you spoke to her
Yeah,
on
we
the
had
phone.
a couple long interviews with her.
Wow.
Yeah. So, have I told you the story about Liz in that interview?
I think I'm trying to remember. Did she call?
Yeah, she called it for me because I was afraid to call her.
You're afraid to call, and so she did it and handed the phone over to you?
No, so I would come home and said, because I was working on a chapter, there's a chapter in the nonfiction book of The Boy from Chicago. I wanted to write about him, not as a martyr, but just as, he was just a kid.
Yeah, that's who he was,
What was he like? I thought, okay, only the mom knows, and he was an only child. So at night I'd complain to Liz, I need to talk to his mom, but I'm afraid to talk to her because she might sue us, or maybe she might say, you can't do it, who are you, this white guy? And so one day I'm at work and Liz calls me and said, guess who I just talked to? And I said, I don't know. She said, Emma's mom. And I'm like, oh no, she called, what, is she after us? And she said, no, I got sick of your whining. So I looked up her number, called her. She's ready for you to call her right now. Here's the number. And then she hung up on me. And so I was like,
oh, that's
I gotta
awesome.
call.
That's right. That's amazing.
So anyway, that was a cool. So in talking with her, Emma was a White Sox fan, and I said, who's his favorite player? Some guy named Minnie Minoso, and I thought that's good background stuff, just little details. And so I looked at the White Sox in '55 and 54, 55 when he would have been listening to the radio, like who'd he listen to on the radio and stuff. And there was an article about this guy named Larry Doby. It was a big deal. He signed with the White Sox. And I thought, who's Larry Doby? And I never heard of him. And looked him up. And so when I got that book done, I thought I want to write a book about Larry Doby because he was actually a really big deal, kind of like Emmett Till was, and nobody knows. And so that turned out to be a picture book, even though that wasn't my plan originally.
So it kind of one thing leads to another.
Yep,
and
just totally unstrategic, just like graduating.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just, whatever happens next, I guess I'll do that. So yeah, not a strategic career.
Well, I mean, I was talking to a friend, Jane Wise. She told me, when God opens the door, you walk through, and then you just keep walking through. And so I think that's a really cool thing. Okay, well, now, a Lifetime Achievement Award. Looking back, what has changed in your perspective? Like, what if you're going to talk to, writers or, people who are interested in literature, and just thinking back, what are some things that you've learned or that has shifted in your perspective now?
It's still hard to write. I'm a terrible. My discipline is awful, and one of the downsides having a teacher job like ours at BYU is we have time and resources. I mean, it's a great situation to write in, but we also have classes to teach.
Right.
And so for me, it's easy to say I need to prepare for this class, or I need to do this thing, and I do need to do those things, but what happens is they come at the expense of my time for writing. So that's something I've had times when obviously you don't get a book done unless you have some discipline. But that's been the battle for me, is finding the time, making the appointment, and showing up and doing it. So that's something I would say, if somebody wants to be a writer, they've got to make the time. And for a year and a half or so, I did it at 4 a.m. There was no conflict then, except for sleep.
Are you talking about novel, creative writing? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, really anything.
Academic writing too.
Yeah, or even if you're writing an article, a 2,000, 3,000 word article for a magazine or something, it's still, you have to find time to write it. And you can't just, and the first draft isn't anything, so you have to revise it, and you have to think about it before you start, and all those kinds of things. So for people who write books, that's why I admire Dean Hughes so much, because how do you get the discipline he's got? There's no magic. It's just he just works, and I'm not a good worker. He's a good worker. So if somebody wants to write books for a career, they've got to be willing to turn off the TV or
internet,
do whatever it is that's distracting them.
Right, it's hard.
And for me, one of the things when I was a young freelancer, my deal was my family's not going to pay for this, and so every year I was determined, like when I bought an electric typewriter, that was expensive, and I thought, I'm not going to buy that until I've got money from writing that I can use to buy it. I'm not going to take money from my family, from my teaching income, because my family needs to live on that.
Right.
And so when I got my first computer, it was the same deal. I had to wait till I had the money, that I'd earned enough money of freelancing to buy the computer. But it wasn't just money, but it was also my time. I thought, I've got to find ways where I still can be present as much as possible for my family, and still find ways to get the writing done. And that's a challenge.
That's hard. Yeah. It's really hard.
See, it should be easy now. I've got an empty nest.
Yeah.
But now I'm just lazy.
I mean, Chris, you're prolific. You've published so many. I mean, you've published a lot.
It's relative, right?
I guess. I mean, I think that's true. It is relative, and your own habits and things like that. But, well, great. Any last?
Oh, I should tell you a story about AML.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and also we didn't even talk about Alan and all that stuff.
So when I first got to Hawaii, it was like suddenly all these opportunities opened up because everything's in English. I can see stuff.
Interesting. I wouldn't think that.
And I've been in kind of a metaphorical island in Japan and in Hawaii, but even in Hawaii, there's the isolation from professional organizations was the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
And so I was writing like mad, but I was really hungry for community. And so those undergrad students I had, that was a great temporary community, but it was just hard to get connected. And so I was still in the library a lot, looking for stuff, trying to find things inspirational to read or things that were inspiring in other ways. And I came across these newsletters from the Association for Mormon Letters.
Oh.
This was probably 1990.
So you'd never heard of it?
Never heard of it. And I thought, wow, this is a network,
Yeah.
And I think something about their conference was a newsletter, and I thought, they have a conference, and man, this would be great to be a part of it. And I'd been writing for the New Era for years, and so I write. So I newsletter to somebody, the secretary, and here's the address. I write them. Nothing. I probably wrote 3 or 4 times.
Oh.
I want to join. Never a response.
That's so funny.
And I thought, okay, I guess they don't care about some guy in Hawaii, or I have no idea where those letters went.
That's funny.
But they definitely.
So when did you finally get in?
Yesterday.
Right now,
yeah.
right here. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really funny. But I love it. I love the thought, we want community, and what a cool thing that they have, and just maybe not for you, though.
And so the real community was moving to Utah when Rick Walton
right.
That was
Rick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rick and Carol. That was a community to be a part of.
Yeah. That's cool.